Hey guys, what's happening? In this episode, I'm going to show you how to process the Milky Way in Lightroom. Stick around. Okay, we're back. So, in the last episode, we had a look at this photo behind, and I showed you how to reduce noise in a night shot, how to prepare your photos, prepare for the shoot the photos, and reduce noise from a night shot. Now we're going to go ahead and have a look at processing the Milky Way. And the really neat thing about this is that the Milky Way is completely subjective how you want to process it, because we're bombarded with images that come from television and movies of space and the colourful galaxies and things like that, which I assume NASA has a good guess at what colour things actually are. But from this photo, you wouldn't be able to tell. This is out of the camera. And so if you want a very naturalistic, if you like, Milky Way, then all you have to do is adjust the exposure and bit of sharpening, and you're done. But it is subjective, and people want it looking different ways, and in different conditions it will look different. It will look different in summer, it will look different in winter, simply the way the light is broken up by the atmosphere. So there's no right way or really wrong way to process the Milky Way, and I'm just going to show you what I'm doing, because as you saw from my desktop photo, I was at Parkes Radio Telescope, or the dish as it's known, and that's just outside a dark sky area in New South Wales, not that far from the dark sky area, but not absolutely in it. And it's pretty much dark. It's a great place to shoot a Milky Way. In addition to that, I timed it and shot it so the Milky Way could be horizontal against the telescope and then rising up as the evening went on. So once I shot my shot with the telescope, I just kept shooting the Milky Way with long lenses, wide angle lenses. I had two cameras going simultaneously to get as many shots as I can, because particularly in Australia, we've only really got a one dark sky park. There are plenty of dark sky areas out once you want to get into the outback and into the centre of Australia. There's of course nothing there, but if you actually want to stay in a motel overnight, then Parkes and Siding Springs is the location you've got to go to. So we're going to take this image and we're going to add a little bit of pizzazz to it. And first of all, we're going to have a look at the temperature. And the temperature as shot was 4250. Now, you may want a bit of a cooler Milky Way or a bit of a warmer Milky Way. Again, there's no right or wrong. Let's leave it at 4250 or somewhere around there, and we'll just play around. First of all, getting the exposure right. So the exposure can probably be boosted a little bit. So we'll take that up, and we'll take it up almost a stop, because we do want to bring out some details in the shadows, and we'll also take the contrast up a bit too. So that's taking it up to around 60 or so. That's good. The highlights we want to take up to similarly around 60. That looks nice. And the shadows we want to drop. We want to drop the shadows a bit. So we'll keep moving them down around 55 or so. The whites, we'll probably leave them just as they are, maybe just give them a tiny bit of a boost. And I realize watching this over the net, you can't see the difference that makes that much on individual things. Now, clarity with the Milky Way, I don't like to use. It can make it awfully crunchy and over sharpened, because you have all these tiny little stars, and it just gets too much. So I really don't like to use clarity, so I leave that at 0 for now. We can come back to it. That's the nice thing about Lightroom. But I do like to hit the vibrance and hit it up a little bit to 25 or so. And saturation, well, look, I just take it up to around 15. You could go crazy and whack it up there, but you're seeing an awful lot of purple now, and to be honest, that purple is primarily coming from the chromatic aberration that's on the stars, and that's a whole lot of small chromatic aberration that, one, you won't notice when it's printed, but two, you also won't get rid of it by ticking the chromatic aberration thing. That's just how it looks to our eyes. So I'm going to leave that around 13, 15 or so, and jump down to the tone curve, and we can do a little more with the highlights and lights on here. We can push the highlights up fairly hefty on here to about 82. You can see that's really coming along now. And we'll push the lights up a little bit to about 50 or so. That's probably a bit too much. So backing it off to about 25. So that's our basic exposure. And I think that's looking nice. And again, if you want a very naturalistic Milky Way, you don't have to play with the colors. You can move straight on to your sharpening and things like that. But I'm going to play with the colors because, well, gosh, you can make virtual copies of this and process it 100 different ways until you find one you really like, or that really suits the photo that you're doing. So this hasn't got any foreground in it. This was later at night, and the Milky Way rises and actually moves. That's because the Earth is doing this spinning thing and the Milky Way is doing this spinning thing, and that's the excuse I use for being so dizzy all the time. But we're gonna pump the reds up a little bit and try and find as much red as we can in that. So I'm pumping that up to about 55. And the oranges, I think there's a bit more of the oranges in there. So I'm going to sit that around 70. Yellows, well, if if there are oranges, there are probably yellows, and I'm going to just tweak that and put it at 20, and greens. I don't know if there's any green in there. We'll just set it around 20. Now, I'm not going to touch the aqua because I don't want to affect the blues too much. But I will bump the blues up and put the blues at around 50. And then purple and magenta. A lot of people like a purple Milky Way, and some people don't. So we're just going to give it a tint, a little tint. And, you know, to be honest, I could have done it with the tint and just boosted that. Again, this is just showing you how I do a Milky Way. Now, you may not think it, but split toning is fairly important. So I'm going to keep the hue at around 14, I think. So it's just a bit warm in the highlights, 15, 14, around there. And we're going to boost the saturation up to around 35. And you can see that's had quite an effect on it. And also the shadows, very important to hit the shadows, and we're going to hit them very hard. We're going to put them up around 70 or so. But where we're gonna put the little box? Well, I think it's going to have to be in the blues. Around 220, around 230. That seems to make a difference. Now, again, some people like a blue Milky Way, some people like a magenta. I kind of like that, so we'll just leave it there for now. Sharpening. The Milky Way is always going to be a hard image to sharpen. I usually start with about 50, so around 48, because it's incredibly easy to make this crunchy. So make sure you zoom in to 100%, because you are seeing noise in that, but you also are seeing pinpoint stars, and then on the edge of the lens you will notice that it was a little longer exposure than what I would have liked, and the stars have actually started to leave a trail. So we've got all sorts of things in there that we've got to sharpen. But people's eyes are going to be drawn to the core of the Milky Way. So we'll leave that at, we'll leave that at about 50. And the radius, we'll bump the radius up so that we don't sharpen the noise necessarily. And the detail, well, kind of want 100% detail. The problem with detail is if you take it down, you're just losing a lot of detail. So we'll bump it up and we'll see what happens when we mask. And then masking. And if you hold down the Option key while you move the slider, you'll be able to see exactly what's being sharpened. So So as we look at that, almost that's 100%, almost nothing is being sharpened. And if we back it off around 70, probably a little less is being sharpened. And with our noise, it's going to depend on your camera and on the conditions that you shot it and your exposure. I'm going to start at 50. And you can see that's made an enormous difference with the noise reduction. So from that to 50, that. I hope you can see that. So that's really cleaned it up quite a bit. And the detail will leave at 50 and contrast will leave it at 0. And the color noise, well, in a shot like this, you don't know what color noise is there. So generally, it won't hurt to take it up to 100. It'll probably clean it up. But you'll also tend to lose a lot of the color from the stars and things like that. So I kind of like to, again, start with 50. And it's working on it now. And you can see the little stars still have got some color in them, but it's not taking them out. And so we'll just leave detail and smoothness also at 50. Remove chromatic aberration. That can have a detrimental effect on the Milky Way, but it also depends on your lens. If your lens severely suffers from a CA, then absolutely use it. And enable profile correction. Yeah, I really don't like that. You can see once I zoom out, we have got some vignetting on the corners of the long lens, and I'd rather just fix that automatically. So if we switch to manual and we go into vignetting, that will allow us to just play with it and to just lighten up the corners a little bit. So about, well, it's going to depend on your lens, so yeah. Okay, we don't really need to straighten it or do anything like that. But what I will do is I will add a little bit of dehaze. Dehaze is something that you would use if you've got foggy mountains in the distance or something like that, but it clears up Milky Way photos very nicely. That's something that Adobe really could have used as a selling point. And down here, you've got your camera profile. So it really depends what profiles your camera comes with. You can try another profile to see how it affects it. That's camera light profile for the Sony. And that's really nice. I like that. Camera neutral is a little less exciting, but maybe a little more realistic. Camera vivid always overdoes it. You know, that's really for grandpa's birthday or whatever. Camera landscape. Not that different to camera vivid. And camera clear is yeah, that's given us a nice dark sky. So but you know, that might be a little too much, so we can, I'm going to go with camera light, because I think the Milky Way can have a fairy tale feel to it. It's magical, the fact that we can see this thing and we can take photographs of this thing. So I like giving it a bit of a magic feel. But now we can go up and we can revisit our temperature. Okay, that's telling me my iPad hasn't been backed up. And again, we can get a nice warm Milky Way or a bluish Milky Way, or something in the middle Milky Way. But these are just suggestions. You can also play with your tints down here, and you can boost individual color channels a little bit. Bring back some of the blue. I don't tend to bother with that. So any further color toning I want to do, I'll do in Luminar or Nik. So that's basically how you process a Milky Way folder. Don't forget to try a bit of dehaze on it. That's something a lot of people do not think about. Watch your lens vignetting. It's going to be different for every lens, so I suggest you do it manually. Sharpening, don't go overboard with sharpening. They're pinpricks of light. It's going to be very hard to sharpen it, and if you over sharpen it, you also end up sharpening noise and into the hue saturation. Just what feels good to you. So and don't forget to use your curves, because your curves are much different than your highlights and shadows up here. It's really fine-tuned, so that allows you to fine-tune it. And so this is the out of camera raw image that we started with, and with a few adjustments in Lightroom, this is the Milky Way image that we ended up with. I think that we've done a pretty good job. If you like, you can now take it into Photoshop or Luminar, give it an Orton effect, which will soften it a little, but I'm quite happy with that. So we'll call it a day. Don't forget to pop along to paulsummersphotography.com, particularly if you've bought an iPhone 10, because amongst our many phone cases with my photography on them, we now have iPhone 10 cases. So that's very important. Or you can get a shower screen, a fine art wall print, or a doona cover. Lots of different merchandise there, so please check it out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.